Okay, so we're continuing on in our last unit this week by looking at kind of a weird figure in the history of philosophy. This isn't somebody that you hear get spoken about very often. And when you do kind of hear him being spoken about, it's always in kind of strange terms and sometimes not very positive terms. Today we're looking at the philosophy of William James, who was a philosopher, a psychologist, a researcher of paranormal and mystical and psychic experiences. This was something that he was engaged in later in his life. I believe he was actually responsible for setting up the organization, the first organization in the U.S. that investigated psychic phenomena. But before he started that, he was actually a relatively influential psychologist, philosopher of religion, and in general, just an American philosopher who has influenced the Western tradition, at least in the U.S., pretty strongly. He held a view that was pretty commonsensical, or I shouldn't say commonsensical, but widespread, at least during the Middle Ages, which is humans are essentially spiritual beings, not just physical creatures. But by the time he was writing in the 19th and 20th century, this view was falling out of favor. And so he studied a lot of things, but due to his associations with, again, the creation of this organization that looked into psychic phenomena and spiritual and paranormal phenomena, his reputation was kind of tarnished a little bit later in his life. He was also infamously known for being an avid drug user. He had done multiple drugs throughout his life. And I think he once famously remarked that he could only understand the philosophy of Hegel on nitrous oxide. So he was somebody who did that. And so he's a guy who is not afraid to have new experiences, shall we say. But I think the philosophy that we're going to be looking at today is pretty interesting. It's pretty fun, so I'm excited to see what y'all think about it. Although earlier on in his life he did bring a lot of rational argumentation and critical analysis to his philosophy when he was studying, let's say, the human mind, free will, the relationship between the mind and belief, we can conceptualize him, I think, as kind of a spiritual romantic. This is the path that his life kind of took later on. Although, again, he does utilize reason, logical argumentation in his philosophy, especially his earlier works, he writes with a great deal of passion, a great deal of emotion. He is really concerned with investigating some of the fundamental problems of human existence. And as we'll see in the essay today, really privileging emotion and meaning in order to cultivate a happy, flourishing life. There are two views that he's most famously known for. One of these views is, how how should we say, distinct, important within the American philosophical tradition. The other one is one that we've kind of heard before, but we haven't explicitly stated it. In the US, he contributed to the expanding of the pragmatist tradition. Does anybody know what pragmatism is, philosophically? Or just, what do you think pragmatism means? What does it mean to be pragmatic?
Not the old TV commercial with the adjustable face, right? The pragmatic.
Not exactly, no. If I called you pragmatic, what does that mean? Does that mean you're a dummy who can't do anything? No, it kind of means something like useful, right? You know how to apply your knowledge, your reasons to get stuff done. Well, pragmatism is a field of philosophy. It's a view about the world, actually. And William James was responsible for popularizing it in the U.S., along with Peirce, who is another famous American philosopher. Pragmatism is a view that the value and truth of words and concepts, worldviews, etc., are dependent on the utility that they add to human life, or the consequences that they bring about. So James is going to say something like, look, if your religion to you adds a lot of value to your life, in some sense, that makes it true. This is kind of a different view of truth, a different view of what makes things valuable in human life, compared to, say, the correspondence theory of truth, which would say a proposition is true if it corresponds to the world. James is going to say, no, actually, something is true if it adds value to your life, if it adds meaning to your life. It's kind of a more subjective way of understanding what is true and what is good in our human existence. So do y'all kind of understand what he's getting at with pragmatism? We're not going to go too deep into it today. I just want to kind of give you an overview of what he's known for. But it's basically the view that what we should care about when we're talking about truth, when we're talking about how to organize human societies is, well, what adds value to human life? What adds utility? Does your scientific data add utility to human life? Then that's good. We can call that true and good, and we should use it. But we shouldn't just throw out mythologies or religions or worldviews that aren't strictly supported by science, because those too add value to human life. Insofar as they help us understand more about the world and our place in it, we could say that they're true. This is kind of what James is trying to get at with this pragmatist view. But this isn't the only view he's known for. He's also known for a view that's known as radical empiricism. So we've talked about empiricism in this class before. Does anybody remember what it is from the first unit? I believe we looked at it through the lens of Locke's philosophy. We contrasted it with rationalism. Yeah?
Isn't it the belief that knowledge comes solely through experience?
Exactly. Yeah, empiricism was the view that primarily how we obtain knowledge of the world is through experience, through our five senses. What we smell, taste, touch, see, and feel. Hear, sorry. I used one of those twice. Radical empiricism is just what it sounds like. It's a more radical view about the relationship between the human being and knowledge. In science, we kind of take it as a given that through our experiments, through our observations of the world, we can kind of look at things objectively, right? We can look at things neutrally, without bias, without any of our worldviews or values creeping in. We can just look at things objectively. This is something that we kind of take for granted in science and when we're engaged in the scientific method. Well, James thinks that's actually impossible. It is impossible for us to actually take a 100% objective view of anything. Instead, he's a proponent of radical empiricism, which is the view that the world and consciousness can never be halted to establish a completely objective analysis of anything. So I'll write this down and then I'll explain it a little bit in a second. I apologize for my poor handwriting today. We take for granted when we're doing science or when we're doing mathematics or geometry or any of these, when we're engaged in these STEM disciplines normally, that we can screen out all of our biases, all of our values, all of our subjective experiences and feelings, and we can really look at things completely objectively. James says that's actually impossible. Because our experiences of the world necessarily become filtered through our own mind, through our own consciousness, we can't completely screen out all that stuff all of the time. And so what that implies is, whenever we observe something or feel something or experience something, or whenever we make a judgment, that is always done from a subjective point of view. And try as we might to be objective, we're never going to be able to be completely objective. It's actually an impossibility. Though objectivity is something we should strive for, we're never going to be able to reach 100% objectivity when viewing or judging anything. Does that make sense? Okay. And so these views are going to influence some of the philosophy that we're going to look at today. But to kind of round out our overview, I'd like to just mention one other thing that James has done to contribute to how we think and perceive of things in the US. If y'all have ever been looking at TikToks or read books that have to do with magic crystals and healing chakra and Reiki and New Age philosophy and stuff like this, James contributed somewhat to that. Okay? Some of his philosophy. Huh?
I said that's space races.
Some of his philosophy has been used to kind of support this New Age philosophical tradition that in the U.S. has been going on for the past few decades, right? Especially, you can see these kinds of books and these ideas if you walk into like a smoke shop or something, or a shop that sells witch and wizardry artifacts and books and things like this. Basically, some of the stuff that James was writing about in the 19th century is still seen and with us today, insofar as it has influenced this New Age spiritual tradition that people are still a part of in the West. This New Age spirituality that talks about the divine one, you know, or the
the eternal consciousness that pervades the cosmos, man, you know, that I saw when I was on my acid trip and it was sick. You know? No? Maybe y'all haven't had acid, I don't know. Maybe you have. I'm not dogging on New Age spirituality, I'm just saying he influenced it, okay? And so he's kind of a weird thinker. And insofar as his views were used to support this New Age spirituality, which a lot of people think is dumb, his reputation is kind of a little bit strange in the philosophical world. Okay? He's probably not taken as seriously as he should be, given his contributions to psychology, to philosophy, to religion. But we're not going to be talking about too much spiritual stuff today. Instead, what we're going to be focusing on is what James has to say about what makes a human life have value. What makes a human life have meaning. And so I'll jump into that unless anybody has any questions. You all good? Following along? Okay. I had you read today an essay, which was originally a lecture given by William James. It was a lecture that I believe was in a set of 3 lectures that he gave. And in this lecture, he talks about, well, what really gives human life meaning? What should we be striving after if we want to live a happy, healthy life that has value in it, that has meaning in it? James might say a little horse tranquilizer now and then is good, along with some nitrous oxide. But we'll see. We'll see. It's going to differ depending on the kind of person you are. What I like about this piece is it has a very autobiographical feel to it. James is writing from the point of view of, well, his own subjective experience in life and trying to answer these deep questions and tying them to experiences and kind of epiphanies that he's had, thinking about, well, what makes a human life good? What should we seek after? He first jumps into describing an experience that he had at Chautauqua Lake, which he describes as being very idyllic, being almost utopian in a sense. Let's see if I can spell this right. He recounts this experience he had at this community on this lake. And he noticed that the people in this community seemed very happy. Okay, there really wasn't any crime. People were comfortable. They could engage in fun and academic activities. Okay, there were people rowing out on the lake in canoes, people playing sports on the beach. They could attend lectures or poetry readings in the afternoon. It almost seemed like the perfect community. And while he was there, James had a good time. Okay, these people were living in luxury. These people were living in comfort. By all accounts, they had everything that they ever needed. But upon leaving the community, for some reason, James felt this relief wash over him. Like he had just been released from something that was almost kind of imprisoning him in a certain way. And he was very confused about this feeling. By all accounts, he should have said that, the time at this lake was amazing and it was perfect. And leaving that was bad. But he didn't feel like he wanted to go back. he felt like he actually experienced relief upon leaving. And he thought long and hard about why this might be. And the answer that he came to forms the basis of this essay. What makes a life significant? After thinking long and hard about his experience there, which was, in a sense, very fun, very comfortable, he realized that the place was very flat. He would come to say later that it lacked depth. Not flat as in geographical, but flat as in there was some stuff, some fundamental stuff of what it means to live a human life missing from this place. Okay? It was lacking depth, it was lacking intensity, and it just wasn't all that interesting. Sure, it looked like there wasn't crime and there wasn't conflict and people were hanging out having a good time, but it lacked a certain energy. It lacked a certain intensity that normal human life has. I don't know if this is a word, but I'm going to make it a word. Interestingness. And as he reflected more on this experience, spending time in this utopian community in which there wasn't any danger, there wasn't any conflict, people were just kind of moseying around, doing whatever they wanted, he realized that even though it's paradoxical, in some sense, a valuable, meaningful human life has to have some struggle to it. It has to have some sort of danger or effort or intensity that is kind of missing from our utopian conception of what a society looks like. Okay? And so, in a sense, what makes life meaningful, he realized, is effort. Struggle, maybe a little bit of danger now and then. He couldn't see himself remaining happy if he lived in this community for the rest of his life. There was a certain struggle missing there that he thought is necessary for a happy, meaningful human life. And this is something that y'all have echoed before, right? Especially in our conversations about AI. If you had all of the power to do whatever you wanted, all of the money, all of the resources, a lot of you said that would be boring, right? If you were God and you could do whatever you want, it doesn't seem like a very fun existence, right? You can have whatever you want at the snap of your fingers, do whatever you want at any moment. What would you actually do in your life? Well, James kind of came to a similar realization. In essence, he thought that, after reflecting deeply on this experience, that there can be no glory, no heroism, or satisfaction without struggle. Instead, if we're trying to leave behind a legacy, or if we're trying to do something glorious or heroic or memorable, something that's meaningful and satisfactory to us, James thinks seems to require some sort of struggle, some sort of fight. If everything came easy to you, if you never had any obstacles in your life, James would say, well, did you really think that your life was that meaningful? Do you think you did anything glorious or heroic if everything was always handed to you? Or would you feel like there's something a little bit missing? And so he thinks long and hard about this. He comes to the realization that, in essence, a meaningful life, it has to have some struggle to it. We have to go through some things. Obstacles, limitations, in a sense, help make life meaningful to us. But he extends his analysis even further than the individual, than his own personal life. Okay? He recalls another experience that he has, I believe when he is riding a train and he's looking out over the workers and the laborers as he's passing through a city. And he recalls this other epiphany that he had, in which he became awakened to the heroism, the struggle of the everyday person, the person who basically keeps society running, the ditch digger, the construction worker, the train conductor, the people on whose backs basically society lay. What he ends up realizing is that in our books and in our stories, we often paint the soldiers on the battlefield or the presidents or the great geniuses as heroes and glorious and amazing and deserving of praise. But if we actually looked a little bit closer at human life, and if we didn't take our lives for granted, what we would come to realize, James thinks, is that people just living their everyday lives, working their jobs, are doing something heroic, something that ought to be reflected upon, and something that we should be grateful for. The everyday person, James thinks, has a great deal of courage that is going unnoticed. We don't tend to write about the garbage collectors in our great works of literature, right? Or the train conductors, or the construction workers, or the people who are digging ditches, who are engaged in this serious manual labor. The landscapers. No, what James realizes in this experience as he's on the train, watching these people work, shoveling coal, keeping the furnaces alight, he sees in their lives a great deal of heroism and courage. Because he knows that, look, they're not living the best life that they can, right? They're not materially wealthy. They're engaging in back-breaking labor. It's really difficult work. But by the sweat of their brows, society is maintained. And he describes in this piece, as he continues to think about this experience, what he calls an ancestral blindness that has taken over people, especially in the U.S. This ancestral blindness prevents us from seeing the incredible beauty, effort, and courage of the regular human life. We think that if we want to live a beautiful, courageous, wonderful, heroic life, we have to do something insane and extremely dangerous, like save a bunch of people from a bunker or write the next great work of literature that is going to be remembered for 1,000 years. But James says no. You engaging in your normal human life, getting out of bed in the morning, helping somebody, opening the door for someone, keeping society going in the small way that you do, there's a lot of courage and beauty in that alone. You don't have to be an astronaut, okay, to contribute something to society. You don't have to be a nuclear physicist who unlocks our next energy method to do something heroic and glorious. Okay, we have the opportunity to do that out there as we're just living our normal lives, when we help someone, when we exhibit love and patience, when we think the best of people instead of thinking the worst of them and judging them. Because we kind of live ourselves into our lives, we take all of this stuff for granted, we don't give it a second thought, we become blind to the fact that just living as a loving, patient human is itself a noble and courageous thing. But until we come to this realization, we are blind to the fact that the people out there that we pass on the street every day are doing something courageous and noble and beautiful. Okay? If we don't actually reflect on how our society works, who keeps it running, all of the millions and billions of individual little acts that keep this whole thing together, that keep the lights on, that keep the water and the electricity running, if we don't actually think about that stuff, we're going to remain blind to the beauty and courage that is right in front of us every day, that we would see if we just opened our eyes. To back up this point, James discusses that the famous author Tolstoy also came to the same realization. Tolstoy also came to see the remarkable beauty and courage and honor in the laborer's life, in what the laborer was doing, and what the peasant was doing. We don't have to be an aristocrat or a rich person or a famous person to live a beautiful, noble, courageous life. No, instead, James is going to argue that what gives life meaning and what we should be striving for is not materiality, but a certain mindset, living a life that is focused on a certain ideal or purpose. And so he ends up saying in this piece that even if we live in poverty, even if we have a manual labor job, even if we don't have all the luxuries, all the music and the clothes, even if we don't have the newest devices, Apple Watches, whatever it is, we could still live a happy and meaningful and valuable life. Even a poverty-stricken life, he argues, could be a satisfactory one, provided that that person works towards an ideal. Because ultimately, it's not money It's not wealth or property or any of this stuff that matters. It's about living a certain kind of life that is guided by a noble purpose or an ideal or an end. We don't need the new Gucci purse to be happy. Okay, we don't need the new diamond earrings. We don't need the best, latest and greatest laptop or television. No, even if we didn't have any of that stuff, we could still be happy in our lives. Okay? And so what he sees as living a happy, meaningful life, a requirement of that is living according to an ideal or a purpose. And he defines ideal as something like a consciously held aim which has some novelty to the person. So, for example, maybe you think your purpose in life is to, help people. As long as you get value and joy from that, you hold that in your minds, you remind yourself of that, the great things that could come from that. You could still live a happy, meaningful life, even if you lost your house, even if you lose everything. So you need to have some sort of ideal or purpose. This kind of is a similar view to what the psychotherapist Viktor Frankl argued in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. He argued that for humans, after a lot of different treatments and sessions and research with patients, he found out that if people want to live happy lives, they need to find meaning. And what meaning involves is finding your purpose, or finding the thing that gives your life value. Because if you don't have a purpose or a goal, you're just going to end up wasting your life away, consuming things, not being very happy. And James backs up his view here with a little bit of argument. He says, look at all the rich people around you. They could have the whole world, all the money in the world, but they're not happy, right? If they lack an ideal, if they lack a purpose. And then if you look at poor people, or look at people who are down and out, or look at people who are struggling, a lot of them are extremely happy because they're driven by something, right? They're driven by a purpose. They're driven by some sort of goal or some sort of aim. That is what allows them to endure the sufferings and the struggles of human life. But if you don't have something that you're working towards, something that you're trying to perhaps bring about in your life, it's easy to fall into sadness and complacency and apathy and depression. No, what is going to make a life good and happy and meaningful isn't wealth. It's having the proper ideal that means something to you, some goal or purpose. And so, to combine this with what he says earlier, we have to have an ideal, but obviously there are people out there who have ideals that are not happy, right? So it's not just having an ideal that matters, but we need to have an ideal, we need to possess it, and we need to work towards it. And the working towards that ideal has to involve some sort of effort or struggle. Because if it comes too easy, then it doesn't make us happy. Also, on the other hand, if it's impossible, then we lose all motivation for trying to carry the thing out, right? So we have to have an ideal, and we have to work towards it. We have to struggle, we have to persevere, but it can't be a purpose that is extremely easy to work out and to carry out, and it can't be a purpose that is impossible to carry out. This is the kind of philosophy of life that he's offering here. So what gives human lives meaning are ideals. To make this point clear and to back it up, that happiness, meaning, isn't to be found in wealth or material things or living without conflict in a perfect utopian society, he brings up one last example, what he calls the labor question. That is, the relationships, concepts, problems, etc. associated with those who work in general, and employers. That is, he considers the question, does work make human life happy? What is work like? Can workers find enjoyment in their lives even though they have a boss and they're not an employer themselves, even though they don't own the means of production? This is what he calls the labor question. Because during this time in history, there's a lot of talk and analysis around work, around labor. The Western world has been rocked in a very, very small way by Marxist analysis, which is trying to argue that in capitalist societies, all workers are exploited, they're unhappy, they're not allowed to live out their lives to the freest and best way that they see fit. They're condemned to wage slavery, in a sense. And so there's talk in this era in which industrialization is becoming a thing. Can people find happiness in factories? Can they find happiness doing these really difficult manual labor jobs that requires a lot of work, that doesn't pay them very much, in which they don't get to keep the products that they end up creating, right, in a factory that gets sold to somebody else? And James thinks that yes, these people can find happiness. Okay? Happiness doesn't come from establishing a certain community. It doesn't come from working the job that is most interesting to you. It doesn't come from having money or property or being an employer and being a boss and looking down on people. No. He says on page 20, each person ignores the fact that happiness and unhappiness and significance are a vital mystery. Each pins them absolutely on some ridiculous feature of an external situation. And everybody remains outside of everybody else's sight. So one thing that he's hearing a lot during this time is that, oh, you know, that person's just happy because he has money. Or that person's just happy because he owns a factory. Or that person's just happy because he's got a nice house. And James thinks that when we oversimplify like this, when we externalize our happiness, when we say that happiness depends on a certain state of affairs, or on having money, or on having property, or on owning something, first of all, that's wrong, he says. That's not what happiness consists in. And second of all, by doing that, we become blind to the authentic individuality of each person. When we start making judgments like that, we fall into this trap of saying, oh, I know what makes the rich man happy, and I know exactly how the rich man works. which is false. Each individual is a unique person in their own right, with dreams, desires, goals, and wishes that we can't know about, that we can't presume unless we actually interact with them. Okay? And so this is what he means when he says that everybody remains outside of everybody else's sight. The rich people think they understand the poor people. The poor people think they understand the rich people. We make hasty presumptions and judgments. And by doing that, by categorizing and characterizing people too early and too often, we remain blind to who they actually are and what actually makes them tick. Instead, we think we know all that. And so we don't ask any questions. And we treat them a certain way, perhaps an immoral way. It is not the case that a manual laborer can't be happy. It is not the case that a boss, somebody who doesn't have to work, is always happy. It's not the case that the wealthy are always happy. It's not the case that the poor are always unhappy. Instead, what he says is that humans lack appreciation for their own lives and empathy for others. And what this does is it prevents them from coming to knowledge regarding their own happiness and what the source of happiness actually is. See, as I noted before, and this is something James is going to kind of insist upon, as we get used to the rules of human life, how to behave in a certain setting, what to say, what not to say, as we get into a routine, we start to get used to all this, and we take it for granted. Right? We don't actually reflect on the beauty of a single fish within the pond that you walk by every day. We don't actually see the wonder that is the sunset over the hill in the house where you live. Right? We don't focus on these experiences. We live ourselves into our own lives. We end up taking all of this stuff for granted because we see it so much that we don't actually see it for what it is. A marvel. An incredibly unique and beautiful thing that if we just took the time to look at it, really look at it, we would see how amazing life is and what the source of happiness is. But instead, we lack gratitude because we take all of this stuff for granted. And that blinds us to the real beauty that is the lives that we are capable of leading, no matter if you're a manual laborer or a college student or a retail worker, whatever it is. For example, just think for a moment of everything that is required to make it possible that I can hold this chai tea latte in my hand right now. Okay? Well, where did the ice come from? Somebody had to do the work to cultivate that water, and then take the time to freeze it, and then store it so it can be used later. Somebody had to go through the arduous experience of creating the machine and troubleshooting it and testing it and making all the little machine parts that could make this straw. And the same thing for the top of this little plastic thing, right, in this cup. And somebody had to really think and imagine and wonder about what kind of design was going to be on the cup. And reflect deeply on that and try to get it perfect, right? And have countless meetings about what font should this be, right? What color should it be? What kind of emotion are we trying to evoke in the consumer, right? A billion little decisions go into every little thing that is a part of our lives. And we don't think about that. We don't take that for granted. Or we do take that for granted. We don't think about how much energy, how much emotion, how much thought has gone into making all of this possible, right? We just walk by it on the street. We don't think about any of this stuff. And so we lack appreciation for our own lives. We focus on the bad things, right? We focus on struggle and suffering rather than having gratitude for the things that we do have. And by taking this stuff for granted, what that ends up doing is making it so that we lack empathy for others. And in our digital technological age, we're becoming more separated from each other more than ever, right? We're spending time on our phones, like some of you here are right now, right? We don't actually go out in the world all that often anymore and experience genuine, authentic human connection, right? When was the last time you had a deep conversation with someone? Hopefully it was recently, but if you're just engaging in small talk all day, every day, how much depth does your life really have, right? No, there's something extremely beautiful about having a really deep conversation with someone who's just wants to talk about it, you know? And so by becoming accustomed to all this, taking it for granted, we become blinded to how we can live a happy life, what the source of happiness is as well. He says on page 20, the solid meaning of life is always the same eternal thing. The marriage, namely, of some unhabitual ideal, however special, with some fidelity, courage, and endurance, with some man's or woman's pains. And so we shouldn't seek after a life in which we become accustomed to everything, in which we take everything for granted, in which there's only comfort, never struggle, never pain. No, the kind of life that we ought to live should have some novelty about it. It should be guided by some purpose, and it should involve some struggle and some pain. As Nietzsche said, suffering is what ends up producing our character. Suffering is what makes us who we are, right? If you never had to face anything difficult in your life, you're never going to become strong, right? If things are always handed to you, you're never going to cultivate a strong work ethic or really appreciate the value of things unless you actually worked for it, right? Unless you actually worked hard for it. And so, in essence, what he's saying is happiness is not a matter of wealth or possessions. It's not determined by our social or economic state, whether we have political power in society, whether we're rich, whether we have the latest gadgets. Happiness is not dependent on any of that crap. And if you think it is, you're fooling yourself. Okay? Life is not all about material success and comfort. And it's not also about being rational or productive all the time. Okay? In Western society, we kind of become conditioned to, well, if Deleuze is right, to become good workers, right? To produce stuff for this giant system. James is going to say life isn't all about production either. Okay? You don't have to be operating at maximum productive capacity all the time. Okay? And you don't have to be rational all the time either. This is where his kind of romantic leanings come in. Some of the best things in life are not rational. Is the beauty of a sunset a rational thing? When you look at the Mona Lisa and you're filled with these conflicting emotions, is that a rational thing? Is pursuing love a rational thing? Now, oftentimes pursuing it is irrational. Your friends will tell you, you shouldn't be going out with that right person, right? They're not good for you. But the heart wants what the heart wants, right? It feels so good. No, instead, happiness must be cultivated by each individual person through gratitude, committing oneself to a purpose or an ideal, through passion and struggle, and by exhibiting empathy and love towards others. That is what is going to make a life meaningful and happy. We have to actually work on cultivating happiness in our lives. Okay? It's not something that's going to be given to us. Happiness does not come about by some external state of affairs out there. Happiness comes from in here. Okay? Happiness comes from living a certain way of life that is in line with your values and your principles. Not forsaking your values and your principles. Not living according to somebody else's mold. But it is something that you have to work on. Okay? Happiness, living a meaningful, valuable life isn't something that's just going to be handed to you. It's something that you actively have to work towards. In this way, James's philosophy is kind of similar to what Aristotle said in our second unit. Right? No, instead, what we should be doing is cultivating gratitude, finding our purpose and living it out, and doing that with passion, with struggle, with endurance, okay? While doing our best to remain loving and empathetic, not only to ourselves, but to other people as well. That's basically what James is trying to say here. okay, in his kind of weird, old-timey writing style. Happiness does not come from out there. And it's also important to realize that you should not externalize your locus of control over your own life. You are not a mere victim of the life that you've been thrown into. Okay? Yes, you feel social pressure to behave a certain way, think a certain way. You have certain expectations weighing down on you. But living according to somebody else's wishes and desires is not going to make you happy. Okay? What you need to do is you need to engage in some deep self-reflection to figure out what it is that you value, what it is that you believe in, and you need to live that out. Because if you betray yourself, if you live according to others' wishes, if you don't appreciate what you have and what you've been given, you're going to become a resentful person. What the existentialists are going to say, and we'll be looking at them later in this unit, is that you have a radical free will over the direction of your own life. Nobody can make you do anything. Okay? And it is up to you to exercise that free will, to live out the best life, to live out the life that you see fit. I think James is also touching on that here. Happiness is something that has to be cultivated from within. It doesn't come from possessing or having shit. It doesn't come from being rich. It's something that we have to work on. And to do that, we need love. We need gratitude. We need to stop and smell the roses. So what do you all think about this view? Does it ring true to you? Is it too romantic? Is it too optimistic? What do you think? It makes sense? Can you speak more into that?
Like the basics of it make sense. The idea that like human meaning, like human life, like for an individual is not about whether your power or anything. It's about the happiness and what you can do for yourself and others, rather than overall, like than just yourself. Like it's his view seems like it's not as selfish and. Like not selfish, but like it's not as much like, oh, it's me versus everyone else. It's like me doing what my part to make the whole system work. Like,
yeah.
Like that's what it's kind of giving. Like me being like me doing my part is enough for me. Like
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I feel. That's how I live.
Do you see people in your life who think that they'll just be happy if they get a certain job, or they'll have a certain car, or they'll have a certain thing?
I know people like that, but I don't know.
Do they seem happy to you?
I mean, you can say you're happy, but are you?
Any of the rest of y'all know people like that? Maybe you yourself are like that a little bit, right? What do the rest of y'all think? Is this ringing true for you? Yeah, Steph.
Yeah, I agree with him. I think it's a good point. Life is more about, life is more than just your possessions, and it's about happiness too. So I think it's a pretty solid point. He goes over some nice stuff that I agree with. Sorry, that was a really bad explanation.
You're good.
Yeah.
Well, what do y'all think about this point about struggle? Do you think a happy human life necessarily has struggle and includes struggle?
You have to have struggle.
Should we not then try to establish the automated communistic utopia where robots do everything for us?
No.
I don't know, that sounds pretty cool, doesn't it?
I feel like you need struggle to create character.
Yeah.
If you don't have
Yeah?
struggle, then everyone else is going to be the same. So then what's the point of having all these different roles if everybody's the same?
I don't know. Why do you need to be different from other people, though?
I want to be my own individual.
That's
I mean, I don't
who
wanna
you
be a
are.
sheep. I mean, if Urban Howdy comes out, I'm gonna be pissed and try, you know what I mean, like, it's gonna be damn depressing and shit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a comment?
I feel like regardless of like automation and like labeling and stuff, like there's struggle just innate to life, just in things that you want to do. You're never, even if there's, even if you have all of like the means to like live comfortably, like there's still struggles in your personal like goals. I don't think there would ever necessarily be a utopia where everyone's the same, and because people are all gonna, they're always gonna have different interests and different goals. And
Sure.
stuff like that. So and like that's something that like I agree with like this whole idea and everything, and I agree to like an extent about like the material things, like not like that's not the most important thing in life, and yeah, like life's not about like your material possessions, but I think to one end, there is an aspect to, you're able to like do the things you want if you have like material things. Like if you have a certain amount of money, you can spend more time doing the things that fulfill you.
Right.
Does that make sense? So it's,
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily fair to be like reject all material things, especially like given like the not automated world that we live in. Like if no one had to work, then yeah, material things or whatever. It's more about what fulfills you.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Oh yeah, that's a good point. And some people are living bad lives because they simply don't have access to the things that they need to survive. Right? Whether that's counseling or food or water or shelter or clothing. Right? Those material things matter. Right? Yeah.
I also think that like whenever it comes to not just like I think whenever it comes to like the struggle, and it's not so much like the labor question, it's more so like whenever like I think of it like whenever I was younger, my house burned down. I use that as like that for me is one of the like that was a struggle that I
Yeah.
overcame, and I'm happy. Like I use that as like this is what like I think that's part like that my life I feel like there's certain people who get struggle after struggle, like whenever it's like I just keep getting hit and hit
Yeah.
and hit, and it's like why is it too calm right now? Like
Yeah.
why am I happy? Like why are things okay right now? Like that is like I feel like I live in that type of world, so this honestly makes sense because like I live through struggle, and because of that I have so much gratitude, love, and happiness for everything in my family and life that I have at this moment because of my struggles,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and also the fact that we aren't like that I'm not like we don't have money, and like how we are talking in this situation. It's like the life that I have created or like my family has created around me. It doesn't matter that I don't have money. It matters based off of our experiences and what we've done.
Right. Your relationships add more value and meaning to your life than
Yeah.
a new speaker.
Yeah.
Right, or whatever it is.
Like just being together, like especially like in that situation, like oh we're not in a house but we're together. Like we don't have money to buy a new house, but we're all together struggling, like
Mm-hmm.
So.
There's solidarity in that, and there's I'd like to ask you all now a very difficult question. This is something that you should reflect deeply on. Please do. Please don't just. Please think about this in your spare time, okay? How many of y'all are on TikTok? Like, look at TikTok. How many of y'all watch Netflix? Watch Hulu? Watch Discovery Plus or Disney or Roku channel, whatever it is. Facebook, Instagram. Is consuming all of that stuff making your life better?
Not necessarily.
There's no struggle involved in it, right? You're just looking at your phone or you're watching the screen. You get to just kind of zombie out, right, at the end of the day. This connects us back to our discussion about Deleuze's societies of control, right? But think about this in a more subjective way. Are you doing the things in your life that are going to make you happy? Or are you engaged in practices that are undermining your possibility for happiness? I have no problem admitting I am addicted to YouTube. That is preventing me from living a better life. I am addicted to at least one of these digital platforms or technologies, whatever it is. If you are, you might want to think about how that's going to contribute to your life in the long term. Do you want to spend the rest of your life looking at your phone for 7 hours a day? Or no? What do you want your future life to look like? Yeah.
But you just said that we have to have time to not be in the highest productivity all the time.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. You know what I saw a few weeks ago? There was one day where I spent 9 hours on my phone. Now, it's true. We shouldn't be productive all the time. But did I need to spend 9 fucking hours on my phone? Hell no. What was I doing? I don't even know. That's ridiculous, right? If you see yourself exhibiting that kind of behavior too, there's a time and place for rest, right? But you may want to think about if the kinds of technologies that you have in your life are allowing you to construct something that you can look back on and be proud about and be happy about, right? And be content about. Or is there a part of you that's always thinking, oh, I probably shouldn't be doing this right now, but I'm going to do it anyway? Because I feel that a lot. I'm guessing you feel that a lot too.
Or like, oh, I should get up and do something, but I'm comfy.
Right. Yeah, oh, I got to get those dishes done. One more video. Right? And so, yes, it is important to live a balanced life. But think about if you're actually doing that. Right? Think about whether or not the things that are in your life are making you wiser, faster, stronger, kinder. If they're not, you might want to reevaluate your relationship with them. Right?
Do you do anything to, like, with the YouTube, for example, like to monitor yourself with it?
Not yet, but I should.
You can do screen time.
Yeah.
You can monitor your screen time for each app. Like you can set it for like a day or whatever. Like how much time you want to spend, you allowed to spend on it, and then you like lock yourself out of it.
Yeah. No, I've done that on my computer before. Yeah.
Then you can unlock yourself out of it.
Okay.
Out of it.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions or concerns? Otherwise, I'll let you all go a little early today. All right. Go out there, find your purpose, and struggle towards it, okay? Rage against the dying of the light. Do not